wonderful. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I would like to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to all owners of country from where you are joining us this evening. I also want to acknowledge and respect that the sharing of storytelling, song, knowledge, language, care for people and country have occurred on these lands for thousands of years and continues. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. My name is Al Parkinson, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Nikki, and we are both a part of the education and outreach team at APRA AMCOS. And we are really pleased to be hosting today's insight session with Support Act. And for those who may not be familiar, Support Act is Australia's music industry charity, providing mental health, wellbeing, and crisis support to artists and music workers across the country. I'm very pleased to introduce our presenter for tonight's workshop, Dr. Ash King. Ash King is the Wellbeing Content and Programs Lead at Support Act. She's a registered psychologist with a background in creative practice and designs and delivers evidence-informed mental health programs tailored to the realities of life on tour, on set, and behind the scenes. Her work bridges research and real-world application, equipping artists, managers, crew, and industry leaders with practical tools to navigate high-pressure environments and build safer, more sustainable, creative careers. Ash, it's so wonderful to have you here again. We had the pleasure a few weeks ago of Ash walking us through everything that Support Act does, which was so insightful and thorough. Thank you so much again for that, Ash. But tonight, Ash will be presenting one of Support Act's mini workshops focused on communication and conflict resolution. So this session explores practical strategies for navigating difficult conversations in creative environments. We'll learn why communication can be both powerful and challenging, how misunderstandings commonly arise, and how trust plays a central role in healthy collaboration. I think everyone could absolutely do with going through this workshop. Communication is absolute key. We're so happy to have you delivering this for us, Ash. Before I hand over to you though, just a quick note on questions. Everyone, if you do have any during the session, please put them in the Q&A function. As we won't have the chat facility available through this session. And Ash will go through the questions and answer them at the end of the session. So you can pop them in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. We are also recording this session and the recording will be sent out in a few weeks' time. All right, that's it from me. I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you so much, Ash. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Al. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining everyone here today from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and of course, extend that respect to any First Nations guests joining us on the session. Thank you, Al, for your very rich bio lead in of me. I will start this session by saying that I am a chronic conflict avoider. And I would say that it's probably contributed to most of the hardest things that I've had to experience in my life. It was something that I never ever found easy to be able to face conflict and know what to do with it. So I'm really, really grateful that I'm able to be joined today by everyone here, where we can maybe lean into the discomfort of conflict, recognize why it arises, why it doesn't feel good, and what might empower us to move into situations where conflict might show up in ways that make us feel like we kind of know what we're doing. Just like Al said, chuck any questions in the Q&A. We're going to get to them later. Make sure you have your phone on you because we've got some QR codes for you to join in on the session with some interactive exercises. And there'll also be some links pasted in the chat if you don't have access to using the QR code. All right, let's dive right in. First up, what do you see here? There's usually one particular thing that pops out. Are you seeing a girl with her head turned and an ear and a bonnet? What about the old wench with the wart on the nose and suddenly the choker becomes the smile? This is a famous portrait that's called My Wife and Mother-in-Law. We can see how both of those images can come to the forefront if we shift our perspective. What about this one? Usually people have one thing that comes up first. Do you see the frog? How about the horse? Again, one is not wrong and one is not right. How about this? Again, we can shift our perspective from seeing two black silhouettes coming in close to seeing a white vase. And this really illustrates something that's going to be at the core of what we're going to be exploring across today's session. We can see it also brought to life in this comic here. Just because you are right does not mean I am wrong. You just haven't seen life, experienced life, lived life from my side. And a lot of us, when we get into conflict, at the end of the day, are really arguing this 6-9 issue where we don't really know or understand or are curious enough to recognize why the person who's standing across from us is not seeing life in the way that we do. And this can lead to a lot of misunderstanding. It could lead to a lot of clashes. So, we're going to talk about what usually comes up for us when conflict arises and how we might try to meet someone in the middle. So, what have we got on for today? Well, we're going to first chat about why communication feels so hard so much of the time. And then I'm going to introduce one of my favorite models. I know I'm a huge nerd for, psychological models. And this one has been one of the most mind-blowing for me when I learned about it. And in its own way, being able to help understand human behavior from a real sort of core place. What is it that we can get to when we make someone feel angry or agitated or scared or withdrawn? What is it that we're playing on in their sense of self, their sense of worthiness? We're going to then shift to talking about communication styles and stress responses. And then we're going to close up talking about trust, feedback, and radical candor. And I'll close the session with a brief reflection with some resources and wrap up. Now, I'm going to be going quick. There's a lot to cover in this workshop. So we're going to be moving fast through the session. There's going to be opportunities for you to join in and take part in some of these. And of course, there's questions at the end. So let's get stuck in. Communication is everything. So why do we keep getting it wrong? We talk, text, and type our way through life. But that doesn't mean we're great at being understood. Like sex or driving, communication is something we often assume we're good at without reflecting too deeply about how we do it. It is the glue and sometimes the grenade in every relationship, at work, at home, in love, and in friendship. Mindful communication is not about being polite or having the perfect words. It's about learning how to share what you need, say what you mean, and actually hear what someone else is trying to tell you before things go off the rails. And that's going to be our focus for today's session. One little caveat. Whenever I get asked to support people through conflict, I feel like the next layer to what they're really wanting to get out of this session is how do I just get people to agree with me? How do I get people just to do what I want them to do? It's less about communication and more about control. Now, when we're talking about communication, this is something that's got to be really self-led. These are going to be shifts that we are going to be able to actively make in our own approach to communicating and connecting with others. The unfortunate thing is that at the end of the day, we ultimately don't have any control over other people, how other people are going to respond at our bids to shift our communication styles, if we're going to get what we want more often than not. So, I don't have any foolproof way aside from maybe getting a magic wand and making you able to hypnotize the entire population to be able to get people to do exactly what you want, exactly the ways that you want it. But I do know a few strategies which are grounded in evidence, which show that these are the best ways generally to approach how we connect to other people so that we can keep fostering a healthy and connected relationship rather than burning bridges and tearing people down. So let's kick off by seeing whereabouts you struggle when communication goes wrong. What is usually to blame? And I want you to think for yourself, maybe think of some concrete examples in the past where you've recognized, wow, maybe my tone doesn't come across great. Maybe I tend to read into things a bit too much. I get defensive. Maybe the emotions piece shows up and it clouds the way that I can engage. Maybe I just sit back, I shut down, I stonewall. I want you to think about what it is that really shows up for you and tends to shut down the back and forth of healthy communication. You can scan the QR code there if you've got your phone on you, or you can also jump into the chat and there is a link. So you can click on that link and you can share a response. Okay, so we're getting some responses coming in, and I know that we've got a few other people who are crafting their responses now. We've got emotion, too much emotion, or complete shutdown. And usually those are kind of the same thing. We tend to shut down when we're feeling really overly emotional and we're uncomfortable with sitting with that. Tone and emotion, self-doubt as a leader plays a big role, and anxiety, right? So kind of pulling yourself back because you don't trust yourself. Maybe you don't feel confident in the way that you're speaking or what you're advocating for. We've got timidity here, being too polite, someone's tone or they are dismissive. I also react very quickly. I mean, that's really sort of self-aware right there. Needs aren't communicated clearly enough for fear of upsetting the other party. Interesting. Okay, so I'm seeing quite a bit of we're gonna be exploring communication styles later on in this session, but some sort of more passive communicators here. I'd say for me, it's often my tone or timing when I'm in high stress situations. Absolutely. And you know what? This is a really incredible place to start for many of you because you already have this self-awareness of recognizing where the challenges are. Anger with three exclamation points. That checks out. And also a very, very common response when we're feeling heightened in the moment. We're trying to get our point across. We're trying to advocate. My impatience is a similar one. Emotion and holding back rather than potentially being hurtful. So, yeah, almost like an excess of empathy where you're not maybe communicating clearly because you're too nervous about how it's going to impact someone else. I need to make sure there's space between stimulus and response. Whoop, we've got a Viktor Frankl fan in the house. We're going to be talking about that later on in the session. So again, I can see that you've thought about this, you've considered it, and you're coming from a really wise place. It's harder to stay level-headed if the other person's tone approach becomes elevated. Yes. So again, that's kind of a challenge in remaining calm and steady when you're recognizing escalation in others because our emotions are contagious. So if we get angry, if we get impatient, if we get anxious, we're likely to drive up the anxiety or anger or whatever emotional response in the person who's with us, almost like we're on a boat and we're rocking the waves. So that's really something fascinating to consider when it comes to how you are showing up in these interpersonal confrontations. All right, thanks everybody for those. That was really awesome. All right, so what is conflict now? We spoke a little bit about communication. Communication is the only tool that we really have available to be able to share our world experiences and needs with the people around us. Learning language was something that happens as a formative part of us growing into human beings in this world. It's because we need to understand how to get what we want and how to be seen for who we are in the world. So conflict is something that is a natural byproduct of this. And it is not always chaotic, crazy, scary. It is just the friction that happens when different minds or needs or meanings collide. It shows up when our thoughts, our values, our expectations, or communication styles don't quite sync up. And so every relationship that we're in, our personal, professional, creative relationships, are going to face moments of tension. And this is not a signal that there's something wrong with the relationship or that the relationship is failing. What it is that it's feedback. It is proof that two people care enough to bring their full selves to the table. Because think about the last time you got into conflict about something that you don't care about. It doesn't happen. We only find ourselves in positions where we are getting into it with someone when it is something that matters to us. And most conflicts are a little bit of a combination of not just what we're saying, that is the content of what it is that we're talking about, it's also how we are saying it, tone, timing, emotion, and then how we fill in the blanks, how we tell stories about what's going on, about what's wrong with this other person, about how they don't know, what it is that they're talking about, or they don't know where you're coming from, and we fill in the blanks. Okay, so learning to understand this interaction is where real connection begins, because we can recognize how we can control both the content in what we're saying and also the manner in which we're saying it to sort of optimize our chances of navigating a conflict in a sort of a relatively you know, I won't say stress-free because conflict's kind of always a little bit stressful, um, more empowered place. So, for the first half of this, we're going to talk about the what of the communication. That is the content. What is it that we're getting conflicting about? And here are more of the root causes of the sources of conflict. So, this is kind of why we find that people get on our nerves and piss us off. Firstly, a clash in values and beliefs. Things that are important to us or believed to be true are not always the same from person to person. Norms and expectations are similar. Again, these things often exist underneath the surface. And so sometimes they don't arise that there's any clashes in this area until conflict shows up. Something that can also trigger some conflict is feelings that status or competency is being questioned or challenged. And we're going to look at that a little bit more in my next slide, as is the feeling on the outer, where you feel like others have banded or aligned together. I'm going to hit you with a little Gandhi right now. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to cope with it. I would say that no one inherently feels like they are great at conflict. Okay, conflict is uncomfortable by its nature. We feel this sort of clash in, whatever these sources of conflict are, and sometimes we don't always know how it is that we can be met by the other person in the ways that we need. Now, this is the model that I love because it shows us what it is as human beings that we need to feel protective of. And that can trigger a response that feels like a threat when it comes to different things that we are discussing, communicating, or exploring with one another. Now, these are three key challenges to people's sense of character and sense of worthiness. Now, our sense of character and worthiness is very important to our identities, is absolutely crucial to our sense of who we are, okay? We like to believe that we are generally at heart good people, capable people, people who belong. So, these different features of challenges are usually lurking somewhere beneath the surface of any conflict when you pay attention a little bit more closely. The first challenge is to one's sense of autonomy, challenges to our sense of personal freedom, independence, and choice. Now, our the feature of autonomy in our identities is something that emerges around toddlerhood, right? Where we don't want our parents to be tying up our shoelaces or feeding us with a spoon anymore. This is something that really is important for us as human beings because we want to know that we are our own people who can live our own lives. So we become really activated by insults or challenges that feel like you are brainwashed, a pushover, a lemming, or a sheep. And these are really sort of explicit insults that sort of needle at that challenge to autonomy within us. Now, what about competence? This is another aspect that's very crucial to our sort of healthy sense of self. And this is when people challenge our intelligence, our skills, our aptitudes, and abilities. And that might sound explicitly like, you are stupid, you are useless, or you are ignorant. Okay, now, so not, unless you have a really nasty bully on your hands, quite so explicit in the challenges of this. And sometimes they are served a little bit more insidiously. And then finally, the last arena that people can feel is challenged or threatened in conflict is our sense of belonging. That's challenges to our sense of inclusion, goodness, and belonging. Okay, so belonging was a key feature of how we evolved as human beings in social groups, in close and tight social groups where we took care of each other, right? So the idea that we didn't belong, that we were cast out, that we were exiled could be a very threat to our existence. So when we feel that sense of being pushed out, that can feel really scary for us and really vulnerable. So how might that sound explicitly? You are bad, you are unwanted, you are different, and you don't belong. So, when we lean a little bit closer into some of the conflicts that we have, or maybe some experiences in the past where we've found ourselves, quite emotional, quite defensive, it's likely that some of these aspects of our sense of self, our character and worthiness were feeling threatened at the time, which led to the emotional response of it. So, we're going to do a little bit of an exercise now where we're going to explore some of these features in a few different examples of conflict scenarios. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the Am I the Asshole subreddit, but it's something that exists on Reddit as a kind of a place where people will bring kind of an ethical or moral scenario and they'll ask the citizens of the internet who is the asshole in the scenario. Often they've kind of done something and they're like wondering, oh, did I do something wrong here? Did I cross a line here? And what I love about these different scenarios is that instead of us sort of taking a moral stance and judging who's right and who's wrong and who's the goody and who's the baddie, as we're very good at, that tends to be the really kind of the default response to these. What I want us to do with these in the next exercise is for us to have a look at some of those sources of conflict and challenges to the sense of competence, belonging, and autonomy in the individuals involved in the scenarios. I'm going to read them out for you. And this one we're going to do together so I can show you how it works. And the next one, I'm going to let you come at me with what you think is behind it. So, this is the scenario. It's a mum and she's writing in, my two daughters are veggie, but my husband and my son are not, and I'm probably what they would call a flexitarian. My son and husband always turn up their noses at tofu or any other meat alternatives. They say it's just weird that it's made to resemble red meat, so it's really the concept and not the taste. There are no allergies. My family and I often have to make two versions of dinner, one meat and one veg, and twice the amount of pots and pans. Thankfully, there's an equal distribution of cleaning and cooking in the house. My daughters had a fun prank idea of making two pots of spaghetti sauce under the pretense that one were meat, but they were both soy ground beef. The goal here was to see if their brother and father actually hated the soy meat and to see if they liked it and maybe we could save some dishes and time in the future. So everyone loved dinner. Both husband and son finished their plates. This is when my daughter couldn't hold it in anymore and told them. They both got very upset about being fed something other than what they were told. So we can see that the conflict here has shown up. Now, I'm just guessing. But I bet, given whatever your existing values and expectations and norms are, that you've had a response to this when you heard it. You probably think, oh, or you might think, who cares? It doesn't really matter. These guys were given a vegetarian meal and they were told that it wasn't veggie. I would ask you if we had reversed this scenario, and we found out that the husband and son were vegan and they played this prank with meat, how we would feel about it then. And you can see how suddenly our values and expectations and beliefs really do play a part in what we consider to be right and wrong. Now, going a little bit deeper than that, I want you to think about what are the sources of conflict in this scenario. Well, what about expectations? There's unfair expectations, right? Well, the norm is that these men normatively like expect to be fed meat for dinner. It sounds like that's what they're used to. So they expected to be eating that again, and didn't expect what they were given. So that clash in expectations is something that may have made them upset. What about values and beliefs? We see a clash of values and beliefs here because we've got the daughters who are vegetarian and then the father and son who are not. And maybe there's a value system here that's feeling a little bit of tension. And then finally, one sense of autonomy. Something that's crucial to our sense of autonomy is choice. We like to know what's going on so that we can choose for ourselves. But the husband and son in this scenario were not given a choice. Something was done to them, and therefore stripping them in a way of their sense of autonomy. Now, whether we think it's a big deal or not is irrelevant. It's really just down to understanding why these two in the scenario felt very upset after having what sounded like a delicious meal. So, when we lean in a bit more into these conflicts, we can recognize what it is that sort of riles us up, that gets us emotional and creates conflict in our interpersonal situations. This next scenario I'm going to read out for you, and then I'm going to leave it for you. I'm going to have another QR code to share. And I want you to be the detectives here and to tell me what you think the sources of conflict in this scenario are, as well as if there's any challenges to those different sense of people's character and sense of worthiness. I'm hitting you with a bit of a music-centric example here. So sorry if it hits a little close to home for anyone. um, I'm a tour manager for a mid-level indie band. We're not massive, but we're doing well. Decent venues, tight schedules, everyone a bit fried by week 3. One of the band members, Liam, has a habit of disappearing right before call times. Not constantly, but enough that it throws everything off. We'll be ready for sound check, doors in an hour, and he's nowhere to be found. Not answering his phone. Then he strolls in 20 minutes later like nothing happened. The crew notices, the promoter notices. I'm the one fielding it. I've pulled him aside a couple of times and said, hey, I need you to be around at call. If something runs late, just give me a heads up so I can manage it. He always says, yeah, yeah, all good. And then, same thing next show. Last week was the tipping point. We were in a new city, tight turnaround, and he vanished again before doors. I'm getting pinged by venue staff. The rest of the band is asking where he is, and I'm chasing him like a parent looking for a missed child. He finally walks in 25 minutes late, mid prep, and I just snapped. In front of the band and crew, I said, mate, this is getting ridiculous. Everyone else is here doing their job, and I'm sick of covering for you. If you can't make the call, at least have the decency to communicate. He went quiet and then said, you don't need to talk to me like that in front of everyone. Now the vibe is off. He's barely speaking to me, and one of the other band members pulled me aside and said I should have handled it privately because I undermined him. But from my perspective, I handled it privately multiple times and nothing changed. And in this environment, one person being unreliable affects literally everyone. So now I'm wondering, did I cross a line by calling it out publicly when it kept happening? All right, so press pause on your judgment of whether or not this tour manager is indeed the asshole. Instead, we're going to ask ourselves the question, what is the conflict? Okay, you can scan the QR code or head to the link that'll be shared in the chat and share what features have arisen in that example between the tour manager, Liam, and any others. Okay, so we're not just saying what's the conflict for one person, we're naming the conflict across the different characters in this scenario. What's being challenged for Liam? What's being challenged for the tour manager? Is there anything being challenged for others? Okay, so scan up that code, and as a little bit of a cheat sheet, you've got this here: sources of conflict, values and beliefs, norms and expectations, feelings that status or competency is being questioned or challenged, feeling on the outer, where others have aligned together. Challenges to character, autonomy, challenges to our sense of freedom, independence, and individuality, challenges to our intelligence, skills, and abilities, challenges to our sense of inclusion. All right, I'm going to leave it to you. Let's see what you got. I don't want to hide these too soon, so I might just wait until there's a few more responses. All right, let's see what we're talking about. Okay, so we've got Liam's autonomy being challenged. Yep, that he feels like he doesn't have the freedom that maybe he expects, and manager's expectation is a source of conflict. Beautiful. Norms and expectations. Yeah, so we've got the expectations of the tour manager who expects the band to show up on time. Maybe there are different norms that Liam is playing by that we're unfamiliar with. Expectations of the tour manager not being met, autonomy challenged by Liam, but also everyone else when he was always late. Exactly. Sense of belonging was challenged when he snapped in front of everyone. Yeah, so again, that he was feel like he was being singled out, and obviously that sense of discomfort when we feel like, oh wow, I'm the one who's being treated like I've done something wrong. Liam's sense of belonging to the group being challenged, Liam's sense of competence being challenged, and his sense of autonomy to be free to do what he wants. So here we can see like a challenge across the board of one's sense of worthiness. Belonging and relatedness is that Liam isn't around when the band want to feel close and united. So yeah, that's the feeling of belonging and connection amongst the band and the band members. Norms and expectations have been challenged by Liam. Why is it okay for him, but not everyone else in the band? This creates an autonomy imbalance where he seems to have more autonomy than the other band members. So yes, this is true too. It could actually leave his band feeling on the outer. Suddenly they're like, well, why am I not allowed to be that free to do whatever I want? We've got sort of disrespect feeling might be felt by the other band members and manager. Yeah, so that's then taking it a little bit further when we're saying, okay, so we recognize what the sources of conflict are and what's our response to feeling on the outer? What's our response to challenging norms and expectations? Sometimes that shows up like a feeling of disrespect. Liam might feel like his sense of competency is being challenged. Yeah, for sure. His sense of competency and being able to show up, make a call time, right? And could also affect his sense of belonging as it's in front of his colleagues. I've got someone here speaking to our earlier example. Consideration, shared competency. Look, one that isn't mentioned here as well is what about the competence to the tour manager? You know, he's supposed to be running a tight ship. He has to be, you know, responsive to the promoter, to the venues. He wants to look like he knows what he's doing, like he's got it all under control, right? So when he doesn't have someone who is, you know, listening to him and not doing what they're told, again, that might show up as something that would, you know, again, it sounded like it was riling him up, and we can understand why. So we can see when we sort of look under the hood that this is not just about a guy who's not showing up on time for a sound check. It's about a lot more. And when we can recognize that, we can have a little bit more understanding when we're moving in to these conflicts. For example, if it is about autonomy, and maybe, anyone who's been on tour will recognize that you're told the whole time what to do, where to go, where to sleep, when to wake up, how to travel, what to eat. There's not a lot of autonomy that's embedded within the touring process. Maybe this was something that was really challenging for someone like Liam. And so maybe there was an opportunity there, if they could speak about that layer of the conflict, to be able to offer him something as an alternative to help meet that need a little bit more so that he wasn't constantly coming into clash when it's something that he really needs to show up for. All right, so thank you everybody for leaning into that exercise and really having a close consideration of it. I hope that as you go forward into the world, you might be able to sort of do a little mini bingo card of some of these challenges that show up in any conflicts that you might be observing or you might be engaging with yourself. So we're going to take a little pivot here now. We're going to talk about the how of communication. That is the style, the manner, the tone, the approach of our communication. Now, when we approach communication, there are kind of two extreme ends that we tend to see or experience. When we interact with others, personality differences and relational patterns can leave us engaging in communication styles that don't always serve us. There's a few of us at the start of this session who are sharing some of their challenges in communication, who may be sitting down this end of our communication spectrum. And this is really where I spent most of my life and where I felt the most comfortable in a sort of submissive or passive communication style. This is, I guess, it doesn't matter what I think. It's fine. Don't worry about me, kind of allowing the thought of sort of empathy and deferral to take up the front seat and wanting everyone else to kind of get their say and to try to please everyone without really acknowledging or advocating for your own needs or opinions. Now, this tends to remove any sort of heat from a conflict, but what it also does is that it erodes you and your presence within the interpersonal dynamic so that we suddenly feel invisible, we feel unheard, we feel like our thoughts and our feelings and our opinions don't matter as much. That can be really bad for our esteem and for our own sense of self. But what about the other side of it? All right, so there may be some sharks in the house too on this call, and this is more of a aggressive communication style. You never listen. Don't tell me what to do. Just do what I said. This is where people who sit on this end of the communication spectrum can come across as very brash, aggressive, or rude. And it's like their needs or their opinions or their approach is the only way that matters. My way or the highway kind of attitude. When we have clashes between submissive and aggressive individuals, it can be quite difficult because the passive person is just going to basically relent to the aggressive person every time. And sometimes we see two aggressive people going at it where no one is meeting themselves in the middle. They're just yelling about their own views and opinions. Now, another style that we can also explore is the passive aggressive strategy. Sure, I'll do it eventually. Must be nice to always get your way. A silent treatment or deliberate procrastination. This is when we may be less comfortable with being very overt, like the aggressive communicator, but also we don't really like what's going on, and we kind of want them to get the idea without sort of being very clear about it. So, the type of communication style that we tend to advocate for in a lot of sort of interpersonal work is assertive, is being an assertive communicator. What is the difference there, or how do we define being assertive? Well, it might sound like this is what I think, but I'd love your input. Let's explore to find a middle ground. I felt dismissed in that conversation. Can we reset? or no, I'm unable to commit to that right now. So being assertive means having boundaries, having a sense of self-respect where you can self-advocate, speak up for your needs, speak up for your wants, your opinions, and the way that you think you need to approach things. So you're able to do that self-advocacy. Which the aggressive people tend to be good at, but you're also open to the stories, experiences, opinions, and needs of others, which is, again, on our puppy side, what they tend to be better at. So it's kind of like a union of these different, two different types of communication styles where we recognize and acknowledge the humanity in others, but still can articulate and advocate for our own needs and humanity. So, now's your time to get into a little bit more self-reflection, and we're going to explore some communication styles. I'd love for you to scan the QR code below and respond to the 7 prompts to explore how your communication style shifts across relationships when stressed. You're going to see 7 different examples of relationships. This is you interacting with colleagues, you interacting with romantic partners, you interacting with these different types of relationships. And I want you to remember a time, maybe not in the so distant past, where you were really stressed out. How is it that you communicated with within these different relationships in your life? Unfortunately, we don't have a domain for passive aggressive. So if you find yourself more passive aggressive, just pull yourself all the way down to the aggressive side, right? We'll put passive aggressive more on that end of the spectrum. If you're more of a passive communicator, yeah, that you sort of sit back, you relent, you give in, take it down the other end. And then if you're sitting in the assertive zone, where you find that you're quite comfortable and confident advocating for yourself and advocating, and also considering the needs and wants of others, stick yourself in the middle. Okay, so we're going to be watching this one evolving in real time. But I find it very fascinating to watch as it moves and see, where are we sitting in the center? Where do we tend to lean more over to the more sort of aggressive side? And by the looks of things, as you know, we still have a few people left to fill this out, but our cohort here seems to be sitting kind of more on our submissive or passive communication end here. So it sounds like we're more comfortable finding our voice with our friends and with our romantic partners, maybe even with kids. But when it comes to work, particularly with managers or work superiors, or maybe people in positions of power, we tend to find ourselves sitting more down the submissive side there, which is really fascinating and good knowledge, right? That sometimes it's harder to be able to maybe voice our needs and our concerns in an assertive way when maybe we're concerned about how we might be perceived, and yeah, are trying to be maybe a little bit self-protective there. Now, this wouldn't be a workshop on how we communicate without speaking about stress. Now, one of the most critical aspects when it comes to connecting with someone over a disagreement is really to bring a sense of curiosity into the piece, right? What we really do need a lot of the time is to be open to recognizing that someone might see things differently and to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, this becomes incredibly difficult when our stress response is heightened. Okay, because what happens is when our body is stressed and our nervous system is responding, our curiosity narrows. The front part of our brain, the sort of the frontal lobe of our brain, which is where a lot of decision making and rational thought comes from, tends to kind of dial down, and the threat centers of our brain engage. So this tends to tank our clarity, and it sets our body in motion, in self-protective motion. Okay, so you may have heard things like a fight or flight response. Those of us with more of an aggressive communication style might fight when we feel that stress response come on. Some of us might flee. We might go, no, I'm stepping out. No, I'm shutting up. No, I'm not engaging. And these are really normal and natural human ways of responding to stress. But one thing that we need to recognize is that sometimes when we're communicating from a highly stressed place, it can mean that we're not really engaging in a way that's empathetic, that's clear, and that's curious. So sometimes some of the best communication you can engage in is actually just taking a pause, is actually not even speaking, and giving yourself a moment to regulate before you engage in what could be a vulnerable or heated discussion. Because when we don't do that, our tendency most likely is to defend ourselves. Okay. And this is when we become defensive in communication. Now, this is when we're not going to be able to see eye to eye. We're not going to find common ground. This is when we're kind of like, this is me and this is you, and you're trying to protect, to self-preserve. So we're going to do a little bit of defensiveness bingo right now. And I want you to see if you might see some of these styles of defensiveness show up for you when you become activated, or when you become stressed out, or when conflict arises in your relationships. And you might recognize, I mean, I'd say it's probably easier to recognize which of these defensiveness strategies are used by people that you know and love and work with and care about. None of us are immune because none of us are perfect. None of us can do communication perfect. So we're all going to be guilty of one or a couple of these. I'll tell you my personal favorites. Okay, so first up, denial or minimizing. That's not what happened. You're overreacting. It's not a big deal. What's up with this? It invalidates the other person's perspective to avoid discomfort or responsibility. So you're not engaging with them and their own experience. You're trying to minimize their experience so you can feel less bad. What about counterattacking? Well, what about when you did that? Or you're always the one who's always critical. Shifts focus from accountability, so from us taking accountability to blaming the other, right? It's like taking the hot potato, throwing it right back. It turns dialogue into a duel. We're not engaging in shared understanding here, right? It's attack. What about justifying or rationalizing? I only said that because you pushed me. Calm down. I didn't mean it like that. Defends intent instead of acknowledging impact. It's logic as a shield for emotion. Okay, so this is when we get uncomfortable really being present with and engaging with someone's emotional response. So we kind of say, hey, I didn't mean it like that. Or hey, I didn't want you to get upset. Okay, well, they might be upset, so that might be where you need to meet them. Deflecting with humor or sarcasm. Guess I'm the bad guy again, huh? Relax, it was just a joke. Often used to dodge vulnerability or discomfort, but it usually leaves the other person feeling dismissed. Intellectualizing. Well, if you think about it objectively or rationally, or you're making an assumption based on emotions. Retreating into analysis or abstraction when what's needed is empathy or ownership. I'm very good with words, so I love this one. And I know that it is definitely not helpful. What about shutting down, stonewalling, silence, withdrawal, checking phone? When someone disengages completely to avoid the conflict, this often intensifies the other person's frustration, yeah, because they're not being met at all. And I think that I find this one to be the most frustrating. There's no engagement whatsoever. Playing the victim. I can't do anything right with you. Everyone's always blaming me. A covert defense that flips guilt into pity, protecting self-esteem while eroding trust in the relationship. And then finally, over-explaining. Let me just explain what I meant repeatedly, without pause. Anxious attempt to control how one is perceived rather than legitimately hearing what's being said. So, here they all are. I wonder if any of them feel more comfortable or familiar to you than others. And I wonder how your conflicts have gone in the wake of some of these responses and what it's ultimately done to relationships in your past when you've engaged in this type of communication style. Again, really normal, really natural, and often what our body is doing. Our body is leading, I guess, our mind and our brain and our mouth and our words to do when we feel under threat. So sometimes we just need to take a beat, remind ourselves, hey, I'm having a conversation here. And you can be feeling that emotion still, okay? It can still be in the body. This can still matter to you, no matter what it is. And these things are all still there on the surface, and yet we can still choose to engage with curiosity, with clarity, and with compassion. All right, so we're running into the end of this workshop now. And one thing that's super critical when it comes to connecting with others is trust. Now, researchers studying working relationships tested the idea that trust might be the key ingredient between group members. They tested how disagreements and feedback can be misunderstood by team members, right? So this is when they're talking about, offering feedback or they're disagreeing on something, and the people in the teams, they take the differences of opinion personally, right? They feel attacked or they feel like that stress response is being engaged. Maybe they feel challenges to those different aspects of self, like belonging or competence or autonomy. So the research here found that groups with a low level of trust within the group were far more likely to get defensive than those groups that had a high level of trust. So in low trust groups, that's when people didn't trust each other very well. It was more likely that differences in viewpoints, ideas, and opinions, which are essential for good decision making, would be interpreted as personal attacks. Okay, so people who didn't trust one another, they weren't able to have open conversations or disagreements or share feedback because they didn't give each other the benefit of the doubt, right? They were on edge. They were protected in themselves. They were guarded. And so they were much less likely to engage in a curious and open, collaborative conversation that was still regarding a disagreement or some kind of conflict. So we recognize that trust is crucial. And again, trust is a little bit of a two-way street. We can't push trust on someone else. Someone has to engage with us, and we need to build trust in real time from one person to the next. So how do we do that? Well, we listen. We listen to someone, and we also communicate honestly and openly. Let's talk a little bit more about how we do this. Okay, so finally, if we're talking about listening first, we want to be fully there, okay? Put your brain where your body is, no multitasking, no rehearsing your comebacks in your own brain, okay? And then you want to be listening to understand. Not just to fix or not just to challenge, not just to win the war, right? Curiosity over correction. And also, you might want to reflect what you've heard before adding your take to make sure that you're really understanding it right. Now, what about noticing the nonverbal? This is less accessible for us now, considering so much of our interactions are happening over email or via text. Can we read into the tone, the pace, the posture of people? People leak through what they don't say. So, what can we read from that? And maybe, like we said before, a pause before a response. Yeah, a beat of silence shows that you're considering, right? And not competing. And then finally, drop the agenda, which I know is hard, especially if there is an agenda. But if we're engaged in this conflict and we're trying to find some middle ground, you've got to suspend the assumptions for a moment and stay open. Listening isn't waiting for your turn to talk. It's listening to understand the experience and the viewpoints and the opinions of someone else, even if we don't like them or agree with them. This is a really good screenshot if you want to take this away with you and you want to really work on your active and mindful listening skills, right? It's not rocket science, but again, it's something that we haven't really ever learned or maybe don't actively practice a lot of the time. Okay, so that's the listening front, but what about the honest communication side? I'm going to introduce a theory that's borrowed from Kim Scott, who wrote a book called Radical Candor. And what Kim Scott speaks for is about the mixture of caring personally and confronting directly to really foster this sense of honest communication. So caring personally is It's not enough to only care about someone's ability to do a job. To have a trusting relationship with someone, you have to care about each of the people who you work with as fellow human beings. It's not just business, it's personal. And it's often deeply, deeply personal. So, how do we show and engage with other people to show that we care about their full self as opposed to just their ability to do a task or do a job? The next one is confronting directly. So, using our assertive communication styles to deliver maybe hard feedback, making tough calls, sharing an opinion or a viewpoint. Challenging people is often the best way to show someone that you believe in them, you're upfront, and that you care. And confronting directly can also show that you're caring for, your own needs and advocating for that. But here's the thing, you need both of these to work because if you only have one, then it's unlikely that you're going to help foster this sense of trust in your relationship. Here's a really good example when we have a look at this four-part chart. There's a guy who's about to go into an important meeting and he has his fly undone and you can see his undies. Okay? It's a very important meeting. His undies are really bright colored, like yellow or something. Maybe they got like Tweety Pie on them. And you notice, okay? But you're struck with ruinous empathy, which means that you care so much personally for this guy. You're so embarrassed and mortified for him that you couldn't possibly mention that his undies are sticking out of his pants. Okay. That would be so embarrassing for him. Like, oh my gosh, I couldn't even bring myself to say it. Like the people who won't ever tell you that there's food in your teeth. Okay. So that's when you're caring personally, but you're not confronting directly. What about obnoxious aggression? That's when you don't care about someone at all. So you're happy to confront them directly. And this is when you might wait until you go into the important meeting and then in front of everyone, you yell loudly, look at this absolute joker. His fly's undone. He can't even do up his pants right. And everyone laughs. Ha ha ha. Horrible. Not nice. Bully behavior, unkind. That's when we're challenging directly or confronting directly, but we have no care. Now, let's hope none of us are sitting on the other end where we don't care and we don't want to confront directly either, which is manipulative insincerity. That's when we see the guy's fly undone and we're like, I'm not going to say anything because he's going to embarrass himself and I'll let him do that. So that's when we kind of notice, okay, well, I don't care, and so I'm not going to confront him, and he'll get what he gets. So kind of cruel, manipulative, not really going to make you any friends. Radical candor is when we take the approach where we care personally and we confront directly. It means leaning into the discomfort of having to tell someone that their fly is undone. Maybe we pull them aside, privately and let them know so as to avoid further embarrassment. And that's what radical candor looks like. So, for those of us who are engaging in relationships where we feel like it's hard to advocate for ourselves, we might think of how assertive communication might invite us to confront or challenge more directly, to maybe voice our opinions and viewpoints a little bit more actively, while still being able to care personally about the people that we're interacting with. And I love this one to kind of help close us out. Politeness is not the same as kindness. Being polite is saying what makes people feel good today. Being kind is doing what helps people get better tomorrow. In polite cultures, people withhold disagreement and criticism. In kind cultures, people speak their minds respectively, with a sense of that radical candor, coming from an assertive place where we recognize that our needs are important to advocate for, but other people exist too, and their needs are important as well. So, some things that I hope that you'll be taking away today is what's the content of the conflict? Does it challenge autonomy, belonging, or competence? And how might your own autonomy, belonging, or competence be threatened? Acknowledge this, okay? Acknowledge why those triggers run deep and work together to find middle ground. How are you approaching the conflict? Is your communication style honest and assertive? Are you listening and trying to understand the situation from the other person's perspective? And then how do we build trust? How are you listening mindfully? Do you acknowledge the environment and make space to listen? What are you observing in nonverbal cues? Are you offering the benefit of the doubt? And are you communicating honestly? How do you show that you care personally? Are you being honest in ways that are necessary and considerate? Are you articulating boundaries when necessary? Now, boundaries are a whole other thing, and we've got a whole other mini workshop just on that. But before we go, I want you to share here what's one small shift you could make this week to communicate more mindfully. Jump in to the QR code or jump into the chat to get the link. hopefully there's been something that came up in today's session that left you going, okay, this is something that maybe I can consider a little bit more. And again, we're taking personal responsibility here. I know some people are really, really frustrating to communicate with or to get through to. I feel you on that. And I wish there was a strategy for being able to get through to people at all costs. At the end of the day, we can only drive our own boat. So we need to know how we want to navigate conflict ourselves and show up in the best ways that we can. All right, I've just got some coming through already. Pausing to think before responding. Again, something just tiny like that. Pause before responding and also ask follow-up questions to clarify meaning. Beautiful. Taking a break. That's right, giving yourself some time to regulate. I'll be calm and accept any thought from others. Okay, again, and you don't necessarily need to be calm, right? You can still be feeling that activation. You can be open to having that in your body and open to whatever comes back to you, right? Caring and being empathic and showing up for my bandmates. Exercise self-control when you have a good heart. Realize resentment at not being listened to. Yeah, so again, you can validate yourself for that too, right? Acknowledge that maybe you haven't been listened to in the ways that you need. Maybe breathing deeply, yes, to help sort of regulate that nervous system when it becomes activated by something. Pause, think, and breathe more. Being curious about where people, including myself, are coming from and why the strong feelings are there. It's really beautiful. And being mindful of my emotional responses, taking a moment to pause before talking and be in the moment of what's being discussed. So I think you guys have really wrapped it up so beautifully with these responses. And I love what you said about conflict happening when you and someone else care deeply about something. Sometimes I forget that, and I could definitely be more curious about how they got there. So really beautiful. Thank you so much, everybody, for engaging so thoughtfully in this session too. And I'm going to sort of close it out with this beautiful quote. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And again, conflict shows up when we care, right? So let's meet each other there as two passionate people or passionate groups who care about something and want to make something great. If you liked what we spoke about today and you want to go deeper and read a little bit more, any of these books are fantastic, great about nonviolent communication strategies, and you can read a little bit more about radical candor. And of course, I'm here to hype up the helpline support at Support Act. We've got free confidential support from qualified clinicians Australia-wide, dedicated support lines for LGBTQIA plus community, First Nations, managers and programs lead, respect at work. Ongoing conflict can really do a number on your mental health. So we know that creative work is meaningful, but it's precarious, high pressure, identity entangled, and emotionally demanding. So if you have any reason at all where you want to sort of talk it out with someone who is a little bit objective and can offer some strategies and approaches, feel free to give the Wellbeing Helpline a call at any time. It's available to you and your family members. You get 12 counseling sessions completely free. And that's it from me. Thank you so much, everybody.
Ash, thank you so, so much. That was so helpful and insightful. I've already taken so much from that. And yeah, I'm sure everyone on the call did too. I also wanted to thank everyone for sharing so openly and honestly as well throughout the session. Such an incredible workshop, Ash. Thank you so much. I loved that. I was wondering, would it be okay if you stayed on for another 2 minutes just in case anyone had any questions?
Sure thing.
If anyone has a question for Ash, there's a Q&A function at the bottom. We'll probably only have time for a couple. So if you can pop them in the Q&A now and Ash will get to them. Ash, I imagine that after those sessions, you just have so many people who walk away going, I see myself here and I see someone else there, and this is how I'm going to like approach that next time, you know?
Mm. I think sometimes like we love the idea that we're curious, but it's very tricky to be curious when we feel so passionate at times, right?
Mm,
Or stressed out. And I think that sometimes knowing a little bit deeper about the psychology behind conflict and communication invites that curiosity a little bit easier. So I hope at a minimum that's what people are going to be able to take away from today's session. And thanks to Lucy, she just mentioned, just wanted to say a big thank you to you all.
thank you, Lucy. Awesome. Well, if another question doesn't come through, Nikki, I just thought we might quickly mention the Connect sessions while we've got people on the call. So we have a series of events that we are running in a number of cities. We're doing them in Canberra, Adelaide, Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, Darwin, Perth, and Hobart as well. And the Connect sessions are a free event where we have industry professionals who join us on a panel. They talk a little bit about what they do for songwriters and for the wider music industry. And we'll have a Q&A and also some networking as well. So it's a bit like a mixer where you get to meet music industry professionals. And we're really excited that we're going to have Support Act along at most of those events too, which will be fantastic. I think I mentioned that those events are free. So you can sign up now through our Eventbrite. And I think Nikki might be working on chucking that in the chat. So yes, if you want to meet Ash IRL, come along to, I think you're coming to Sydney and Brisbane, aren't you, Ash?
Yeah.
Right. Awesome. Well, I think, we just got one question. Ash, do you offer free sessions if we call the helpline?
So with the helpline, I don't actually work on the helpline. My work with Support Act is actually in designing and delivering these workshops like today's. So there are other mental health practitioners, counselors, psychologists who work on the helpline, and all of the sessions are free. So yep, there's absolutely no charge incurred. You call up and you speak to a therapist who has been briefed or has worked in creative industry, so they kind of get what tends to come up for a lot of people working. And most people tend to call about career concerns, right? Where sort of anxiety is sort of baked into the experience of showing up to work. So please utilize that if you need to. You can have ongoing sessions with the same clinician over time too.
Awesome. So such incredible support, really. It's amazing. Beautiful. All right. Again, Ash, thank you so, so much. That was just brilliant. We'll definitely, hopefully, have a few more of those mini workshops at some point. But for now, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ash. Bye.